Hello friends, my name is JJ, and it has been a while since I have done a video about Canadian politics, so today I thought I would talk about one of my most requested topics, which is the state of the Canadian Conservative Party. The Conservative Party of Canada is currently in the midst of a contest to pick their next leader, who will be their candidate for Prime Minister against Justin Trudeau in the next Canadian national election, whenever that ends up being. Though in theory, Canada's next general election is scheduled for October 16th, 2023, the Prime Minister also has the constitutional authority to reschedule the election for whenever he wants it. And the thinking is that since Prime Minister Trudeau lost his parliamentary majority last year, it makes sense from his perspective to reschedule the election sooner rather than later in order to help him overcome this political handicap. Accordingly, there has been some gossip in the press that Trudeau might schedule the election as early as this fall, or maybe in the spring of 2021, or some other time well before 2023. In any case, this climate of political uncertainty means that all of the Canadian political parties need to have their candidates for Prime Minister in place ASAP. Now, I have been reluctant to make a video about the Conservative Party leadership election just because I don't really think it is all that interesting. The Conservative Party of Canada is not really in a great place these days, and I don't know a lot of Conservatives who are genuinely excited by this race or any of the candidates, or think that any of them really have that much of a shot to defeat Prime Minister Trudeau in the next election, whenever that winds up being. But hopefully by learning about the Conservative leadership contest, you will be able to expand your knowledge of Canadian politics, and I mean, that's all you people really want from me, right? Okay, so Conservative Party leadership elections across Canada usually come down to basically four choices. Someone runs to push the party more to the left, someone runs to push it more to the right, someone runs as basically Mr. Status Quo, and someone runs as the token candidate of the Christian Social Conservatives. Now, a lot of these categories are not precise, and some candidates may fit into more than one of them simultaneously. Certainly, to win control of the party, you have to have a fairly broad appeal and an ability to win over more than just one faction, so candidate identities can get a little blurry sometimes. The last Conservative leader, Andrew Scheer, for instance, was understood as being a kind of hybrid between the status quo and part of the Christian right. But luckily, in this election, things are pretty clean because there are only four candidates and each one has a pretty clearly defined brand. They are former Attorney General Peter MacKay, who is seen as the more progressive candidate, former Veterans Affairs Minister Erin O'Toole, who is seen as the status quo guy, current Member of Parliament Derek Sloan, who is seen as the hard right guy, and outsider candidate Leslyn Lewis, who is the Christian one. So let us talk about these characters one by one. Peter MacKay is the most famous because he has been in Canadian politics the longest. He is from New Glasgow in New Scotland, and like so many successful Canadian politicians, he is the son of a former cabinet minister. The younger MacKay was first elected to Parliament in 1997 when he was only 31 years old. Now, get this. Back in 1997, there was no such thing as the Conservative Party of Canada. Instead, MacKay was elected as a member of what was known as the Progressive Conservative Party. For over 100 years, the Progressive Conservatives had been Canada's dominant right-wing party. But then, in 1993, the Canadian party system kind of exploded, which you can learn more about in my award-winning video on the disastrous reign of Prime Minister Kim Campbell. In any case, one of the main consequences of this explosion was that Canadian Conservative voters suddenly became very factionalized. Most Conservatives started supporting a new party, the Canadian Conservative Reform Alliance, while a smaller faction stayed loyal to the old Progressive Conservatives. And as the years went on, the differences between these two parties became more stark. The Reform Alliance Party became the more hardcore, ideological populist party, while the PC party became increasingly left-wing. In 2003, Member of Parliament MacKay was elected head of the Progressive Conservative Party, beating out a more conservative rival known as Jim Prentice. He did this by forming an alliance with the most far-left candidate, a guy named David Orchard. In order to secure Orchard's support, MacKay had to promise that he would do various left-wing things once he became leader. Most notably, never engage in any merger talks or joint candidates with the Reform Alliance Party. MacKay's willingness to accede to Orchard's demands was seen at the time as evidence that the PC party was drifting even further to the left, and that the gap between the two parties of Canada's nominal right was getting wider than ever. But then, just a month after he won the party leadership, MacKay abruptly decided to betray Orchard and engage in merger talks with the Alliance Party anyway. The head of the Alliance Party at that time was a guy called Stephen Harper, and even though the PC party was considerably smaller than the Alliance Party, MacKay still drove a pretty tough bargain with him. He got Harper to agree to a merger that would create a new party, the Conservative Party of Canada. But as the price of the deal, most of the Alliance Party's hardcore conservative positions would have to go. This new party would support progressive social policy, back the Canadian healthcare system without reservation, support official French-English bilingualism, and promise to reach out to all Canadians, not just like-minded conservatives. Now, despite all this, the merger, which was finalized in 2003, still offended a lot of PC party people. At least 5 members of MacKay's parliamentary caucus refused to join the new party. 2 even became Liberals, as did Mr. Orchard. But MacKay nevertheless got a lot of praise from mainstream conservatives and the press for putting aside old rivalries and creating something bigger than himself. MacKay considered running to head this new party, but instead that job eventually went to Stephen Harper. And when Stephen Harper was in turn elected Canada's first ever Conservative Party of Canada Prime Minister in 2006, Harper gave MacKay a string of important jobs in his administration, including Foreign Minister, Defense Minister, and then finally, Attorney General. Now, I wouldn't say that MacKay really made a name for himself in any of these jobs. He wasn't super controversial, but he wasn't super popular either. To a large degree, you could say that a lot of the last 15 years of MacKay's political career has been directly born from his status as a founding father of the modern Conservative Party. This idea that he's kind of an elder statesman of the Canadian conservative movement that everyone should respect. And now that is probably the main thing his current quest to be head of the Conservative Party has going for him. A sense of inevitability. He certainly seems to have the backing of much of Canada's conservative political establishment. I mean, you can see his social media feed has just descended into little more than a running tally of all the politicians endorsing him. I've certainly met more than a few conservative voters who say that they're supporting MacKay not out of any principled reason, but just because they figure he's so famous he will surely win and they want to back a winner, which is not to say that principled MacKay voters don't exist. Many people on the more moderate end of the Conservative Party look at MacKay's history and figure he's a guy who might be able to help their party soften its image a bit, maybe make it more attractive to Trudeau voters, and certainly there is some polling data to support this. On the other hand, however, MacKay's history has also left some of the more conservative members of the party deeply suspicious of him. There are many conservatives in Canada who feel that the Conservative Party has already compromised too much and see the idea of MacKay as leader as like the ultimate sellout. I should note that a lot of this analysis is really quite speculative, since MacKay isn't exactly running on a really clear platform that we can subject to vigorous ideological analysis. His campaign has been quite widely criticized for just being a mash of empty platitudes, confused messaging, and lame slogans, which in turn has played into a common criticism you often hear about MacKay, which is that he's just this fundamentally kind of empty, ambitious character who just wants power for its own sake. Now, MacKay's main rival is Erin O'Toole. He is from Ontario and is also the son of a former politician. He has been in politics for considerably less time than MacKay and was first elected to Parliament in 2012 when he was 39. His previous career was in the military, where he was an officer in the Canadian Air Force, and he was later involved in various charities involved with veterans issues. Prime Minister Harper accordingly appointed him Minister of Veterans Affairs in 2015, where he served for just under a year until the Conservatives lost the 2015 election to Justin Trudeau. Now, given his relatively short political career, O'Toole is not very famous, and the fact that he is currently considered the leading candidate to beat Peter MacKay is really just a testament to how thin the Conservatives' roster of candidates is this time around. In his campaign propaganda, O'Toole is marketing himself as the true blue Conservative, which is obviously a not-so-subtle dig at the reservations a lot of Conservatives have about MacKay being too far to the left. The O'Toole campaign has likewise been a lot more hardline in its rhetoric than MacKay, positioning him as the only guy who will actually stand up to Trudeau and fight against the Chinese regime and stick it to those eco-radicals and take Canada back. What is ironic about all of this, however, is that in the last Conservative leadership election, in 2017, O'Toole ran on a vastly different platform. In that race, the race to replace Old Man Harper, it was O'Toole who was running as the super moderate, who was going to put a kinder, gentler face on the party. So while O'Toole has emerged as the favored candidate of people who think that MacKay is too progressive, he has also earned a lot of criticism for being a fairly cynical politician who is not really that different from MacKay deep down. Both men are clearly hyper-ambitious guys who will do whatever it takes to win in the context of whatever moment they happen to be in. Alright, now let us talk about the two minor candidates. The most minor is probably a guy called Derek Sloan, a 35-year-old first-term member of parliament from Ontario, and his slogan is "Conservative without apology." He is just running on a very explicit, across-the-board, right-wing platform. Cut immigration, oppose abortion, oppose LGBT rights, repeal gun control, overturn environmental protections, pull out of UN treaties, and so on. Though he has earned some attention and infamy for being so aggressively outspoken, he is not a remotely well-known politician and will likely finish in a distant fourth place. The candidate who will probably finish in third place, meanwhile, Dr. Leslyn Lewis, is a bit more interesting, however. For starters, she is the first woman of color to ever run to head the Conservatives. Like many black Canadians, she is first generation. She was actually born in Jamaica, but immigrated to Canada as a little kid. She is a lawyer by trade and a PhD, but she is also completely obscure and has never held political office before, although she did try unsuccessfully to run for parliament in 2015. But the reason why she matters is that she is a very devout Christian who has done a good job networking with Canada's sizable community of socially conservative evangelicals. This is a group that tends to play an influential role in the affairs of the Conservative Party. Derek Sloan is an evangelical as well, but while he carries himself as this kind of wild and untamed character, Dr. Lewis has put a lot more effort into presenting herself as this very calm and cautious figure, someone who is also very pro-life and skeptical of a lot of LGBT initiatives, but also a lot more thoughtful and pragmatic about it. Her anti-abortion platform, for instance, focuses on targeting those forms of abortion that the polls suggest are the most controversial with the Canadian public.
I would stop the misogynist practice of sex-selective abortion, and I believe that over 90% of Canadians agree that a fetus shouldn't be terminated on the sole principle that it's a girl. I would also stop coerced abortion, and that's also not a divisive issue. The majority of Canadians agree that a woman should not be coerced into an abortion.
She has also attempted to position herself as a woman of great principle on a couple of other issues that matter a great deal to ideological conservatives, such as identity politics, which she recently wrote a big thing denouncing. All of this has made her an unexpectedly popular figure in some corners of the Canadian right, who really dislike MacKay and O'Toole, but also think that Derek Sloan is a bit nuts. Now, the reason why these two minor candidates could wind up mattering in the end is because the Canadian Conservative Party, like most Canadian political parties, elects their leader using a ranked ballot. This is the system where if nobody gets a majority of first place votes, they eliminate the lowest ranking candidate and redistribute their voters' second place votes, and so on. And the thinking is that the Lewis and Sloan voters probably hate MacKay most of all. So when those candidates are inevitably pushed out, their second choice votes will all go to O'Toole and allow him to win an easy victory on the second or third round of tabulation. That's basically Team O'Toole's dream scenario, at least. Team MacKay's dream scenario is just that his air of inevitability intimidates everybody into voting for him, and he cruises to an easy victory in the first round, and the whole thing is wrapped up by supper time. Now, Canadian party elections are decided by card-carrying, fee-paying party members, which are an extremely small group of people. In the last Conservative leadership election, only about 140,000 people voted, which amounts to like 0.3% of Canada's population. And with an electorate that small, it is really impossible to do accurate polling. So all we can really do is speculate on what we think might happen. But in any case, the polls we do have tell us that Prime Minister Trudeau is quite popular right now, meaning that whoever the Conservatives pick to run against him will probably lose, maybe in little more than a year from now. Meaning that before you know it, the Conservatives could easily be back to square one. See you all next week.